As much as the Chicago Bears need to invest in their offensive line in the NFL draft, they should still prioritize their first round pick on the defensive line and a premium pass rusher.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we're going to talk about this defensive end edge rusher class in the NFL draft. We got to hear from them at the NFL Scouting Combine on Wednesday, and we'll break down why that's the position the Bears need to prioritize with their first round pick. And we'll go in depth on a few of these prospects in particular that we got to hear from. One is Marshall edge rusher Mike Green, who super productive, super talented, but spent a lot of his media availability addressing sexual assault allegations against him. We'll get into what we know on that and how that could affect his draft stock. And we'll also hear from Texas A&M edge rusher Shemar Stewart, who has all of the physical traits you could possibly want, but the production was particularly low in college, and it makes for a more difficult evaluation of what his prospects look like moving forward into the NFL. But the more time you spend looking at this draft class and looking at where the Chicago Bears needs are and resources can be allocated, it's feeling more and more clear to me that the priority for their first round pick should be on the defensive line, should be with an edge rusher. Now, that doesn't mean you take an edge rusher no matter what and reach for a player that might not be worth the 10th overall pick specifically, but I do think that's a position that you want to prioritize here, even above all of the clear and obvious needs on the offensive line, because this is a strong edge rusher class at the top. The Bears should have a good set of options there to pick from at 10, or even if they find a trade partner and want to move down, there's still going to be options for them. They could try and move up, I suppose, for somebody like Abdul Carter from Penn State, but that's probably going to be a bit out of their price range at this point. But it comes down to mainly a positional value argument of where the Bears are right now, that when it comes to addressing this team's needs, the offensive line versus defensive end here, oftentimes it is easier to find quality offensive linemen later in the draft, and it is harder to find the same quality of pass rusher later in the draft. And I think when we're talking about a top 10 pick here, it is a premium resource to invest in a position, and that premium resource is better spent on an edge rusher than an offensive lineman. An individual edge rusher has a significantly larger impact on the success of a team than one individual offensive lineman. Now, I think the offensive line as a whole has a much, much bigger impact and needs to be properly addressed and invested in. But then it's about getting the most value for your first round pick, because when you think about what the Bears are building here, one premium offensive lineman with the 10th pick does not alone fix this offensive line. You need to add multiple free agents into this mix and a whole rebuilt group from almost entirely from left to right. And what that creates is then a need for a lot of different talent, not just a big splash at the position. I think it's the same conversation we have about Trey Smith. It's like, if you're going to pay Trey Smith $22 or $23 million a year, are you going to get $23 million a year of impact from him? When you think about what a $23 million edge rusher is by comparison, like, who would have a bigger impact on this team? Someone like, Danielle Hunter, who was a free agent last season, versus Trey Smith. Like, one of those players has a more significant down-to-down impact on the team. And I think given that you can find starting caliber guards and centers, especially in the second and third round, you don't want to utilize the 10th overall pick in the draft at a position that you can find not nearly as good of a player, but an adequate player that fills your need elsewhere in the draft. Whereas pass rushers are that more premium, high value position that you want to utilize your biggest resources in the most premium valued positions. It's a similar conversation about linebackers and safeties and running backs to some extent, where if you can get a comparable player or a decent player, a good enough player with one of your later draft picks, it's harder to use that first round pick at that position unless you really feel like the player you're getting is a cannot miss dynamic, future Hall of Fame caliber type of blue chip prospect. And I'm not sure that perfectly exists for the Bears in this class on the offensive line. Like, Will Campbell from LSU is the consensus top guy, but he's not Joe Alt. I think Joe Alt is a different conversation here. Will Campbell might be a guard in the NFL, and the Bears shouldn't use a top 10 pick on a guard. There's not a Quentin Nelson level guard in this draft class. I mean, Campbell's very good, and it's not a knock on Campbell. It's just like not every good prospect is a great blue chip prospect. And so to me, if you're not getting this bona fide blue chip stud, then you got to go lean on position value and say, hey, it's more valuable to get a really good edge rusher with this pick, with the caveat that it needs to align with the draft board a little bit here, right? Again, we're not just reaching to take a pass rusher for the sake of taking a pass rusher, but you've got a lot of different options to work from here. Abdul Carter from Penn State's not going to be there at that point, but from there, the likes of Michael Williams from Georgia or James Pierce from Tennessee, or a couple guys we're going to talk about a little bit more here, Mike Green from Marshall or Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M. Like, these are all guys that are right around this range, that if you take them at the 10th overall pick, it's not much of a reach. I mean, it depends on how you want to evaluate each guy. Maybe some guys you might have higher than others, and out of those four, you can kind of arrange them in whatever you want. And maybe the guys you're highest on in that group are worth the 10th overall pick, and the guys you're lowest on you feel like aren't worth the 10th overall pick. But the fact that is, there's 3 or 4 different flavors of edge rushers there that are all in this range and in this caliber of player that gives you the most value for that top 10 pick. You want to use that top 10 pick on these premium, expensive positions so you can lock in that player on a rookie contract. You're thinking quarterbacks and edge rushers and cornerbacks and wide receivers, like, the true premium value positions in the NFL. That's where you ideally want to invest these resources and a pick this early in the draft. That's not to say you reach just to take that. And if the edge rushers you like are gone and Will Campbell's the best player on your board, take him, of course, or whatever it might be. It's not to say that the Bears have to draft a defensive end no matter what, but it should be the priority here, almost regardless of what you do in free agency. Because even if you sign a new starting defensive end like Chase Young or whoever, like, that will not preclude me from using a first round pick on an edge rusher. The Philadelphia Eagles have certainly shown you that keep using first-round picks on defensive linemen, and it tends to pay out even when you already have a bunch of other first-round picks already on your defensive line. The Bears need to keep building that side of the ball. And then, of course, use the rest of your draft picks on the offensive line, for sure. Like, use your second-round picks, your third-round picks. Like, invest in that position, for sure. But when the premium resource is the top 10 pick, you need to use it on a more premium position. And if there was a left tackle, that can be a premium position. But if these guys are all kind of hybrid tackle guards that may end up moving inside anyway, then that doesn't scream to me like a premium investment worthy of that top 10 pick type of player. I mean, maybe we can talk ourselves into Will Campbell, and we certainly will have plenty of time to do that over the course of the pre-draft process here. But for now, like, these edge rushers are the difference makers and are the value that utilizes the 10th overall pick best for the Bears if draft boards line up the way it needs to. Now, it's going to be a question of how the draft board lines up, because some of these guys, there's more to the evaluation than just the tape. And obviously the tape is the most important thing, but then you get off-field concerns with someone like Mike Green from Marshall, who we'll talk about next. And then also there's production questions about somebody like Shemar Stewart. There's obviously medicals will be a part of this evaluation as well. Like, there's going to be some movement there, and there's certainly no clear consensus on how you might rank these edge rushers after Abdul Carter from Penn State, who's going to be a top 3 pick in this draft. And the Bears, I just don't think have the firepower to move up. I don't think it's worth the cost for where the Bears are. They need draft picks to build the roster. So we'll get to know some of these potential moving pieces up and down draft boards from what we're hearing at the NFL Combine next on Locked On Bears. It's an impressive group of edge rushers down here in Indianapolis, and they're going to be doing on-field drills today as this podcast comes out, and that's going to be a possibility for these guys to kind of separate themselves a little bit. Some of these guys are pretty strange freak athletes that I think are going to blow up the combine, and somebody like Shemar Stewart, we're going to talk about a little bit later on, is definitely one of those guys who I'm expecting big things from here. But one of the big talking points around the combine on Wednesday, as the defensive lineman was talking, was all about Marshall defensive end Mike Green. I think he led the nation in sacks this past season, has been super, super productive in his college career. He went to the Senior Bowl and had a pretty strong showing there as well. He ran over and bulldozed one of the offensive linemen. That clip was kind of going viral among the football Twitter circles. But normally when players come out to these media availabilities at the combine, right, it's kind of a lot of not saying much, right? They're asking about, what do you want to improve on as a prospect, and what teams have you met with, and what's the draft process been like for you, and what are you expecting about your combine drills? Like, usually it's kind of normal, benign stuff. But for Marshall edge rusher Mike Green, who's a projected top 15 pick in this upcoming draft, he had to spend most of his, or I wouldn't say most, but a lot of his media availability denying and defending himself against multiple allegations of sexual assault. And that, to me, seems like a pretty clear red flag that could affect his draft status. And he himself said he's not worried about it affecting his draft status because he has denied it and claims that we don't know on the outside, we don't know all of the facts and the whole truth and all of this stuff. And we still don't really know a lot of the details, but I wanted to play some of Mike Green's press conference audio here talking about the allegations and denying it and giving us some background on what those look like. And then we'll kind of take stock of what this could mean for him in the NFL draft.
What did happen that caused you to leave?
Accusation.
The accusation of something.
Of sexual assault that I'd never been questioned about. That nobody ever investigated. No, I've never been charged with anything, and I'm just going to continue to stick to my process and just tell the truth and how it is. There's 2, one in high school and one in college. And at Virginia, it was an anonymous report, so no, that it was no. It was nothing that came up out of it. There was no questions that even been asking me. Out of high school, yes, they did do their due diligence, and they end up just closing the case. Yeah, there's a lot of talk out there, and it's just a bunch of people that really don't know what actually happened. I've never done anything wrong. I've never been charged with anything. My main focus right now is just telling these teams everything that they need and want to know. It's just a little frustrating just seeing online that everybody just has everything to say, and that's not the case. So I'm just going to continue to stick to the process, and I'm confident in myself and the way I've been handling this process. So that's going to keep on doing.
Now, it's worth noting a couple things there. First of all, those clips of Mike Green I played were not in chronological order of how they came up in questions and stuff. I ordered them intentionally just to make it more clear and be able to flow a little bit better from one to the other. And those, of course, were not naturally back to back that way, but I wanted to sort of I did take 20 minutes of press conference audio and try and condense it down to about 90 seconds there. So just so you know, that's not the exact order of how everything came out, but I think it paints the picture, right? 2 separate allegation situations, one in high school and then one at Virginia that led him to transfer to Marshall. The one at Virginia, as he said, was an anonymous allegation, was filed anonymously against him, so there wasn't really anything for the school to investigate because there wasn't a person putting their name on the allegation, but it was someone notifying the program that happened to them. And then the one in high school was not anonymous. And as he said, I think his words was they did their due diligence and he wasn't charged with anything. But I think it's important to be careful about the language there, because just because he wasn't charged with anything doesn't mean he was fully cleared of any wrongdoing. There's a lot of reasons why the investigation of sexual assault allegations may not produce actual criminal charges, but just because it didn't produce charges doesn't mean he was found to be innocent either. Perhaps there was no real finding altogether. But what NFL teams are going to do is find out every possible detail they can from that. They're going to get police reports. They're going to get whatever they can get their hands on. They may end up even talking to the other people involved in those allegations and his high school coaches, right? They're going to go really deep on this stuff and try and figure out, like, not even necessarily is Mike Green guilty or not. That's not necessarily the point from an NFL perspective. It's like, what is his character actually? Is he a good person? Was he truly, falsely accused or whatever defense he might say there? Or was there some real merit to this, but other things kind of got in the way of charges and the case really being fully figured out? And of course, then when you add in a second situation at Virginia, right, it becomes a question of, is this a pattern of behavior, or is this a person who, is truly innocent and has been, accused multiple times unfairly? Like, it starts to, the more it happens, the less benefit of the doubt someone starts to get there. And I think this is something that NFL teams are really going to have to think long and hard about. And I think from a Chicago Bears perspective, the team that wasn't willing to draft Jalen Carter because of off-the-field issues, different off-the-field issues, but off-the-field issues nonetheless, is this the kind of thing that maybe the Bears say is too much, and is whether they can prove anything or not, like what it says about him and what it surrounds him and what they may uncover there might be too much for them to say, hey, this is just not a player that we're interested in taking a risk on coming into our team. Or maybe they do their due diligence and say, no, we're comfortable with the information that they found out and are able to move forward with it. But I think at least some teams are not going to draft Mike Green as a result of this sort of thing, as much as he himself says he's not worried about it and that he's happy to answer questions about it. And his tape is very good. Like he's a good football player for sure, but there's more to draft evaluation and to being a successful NFL player than just being a good football player. And the Bears talked a lot about having good humans and good culture on the team. You have to figure out, is this a person who can fit in your culture, or is this a person who's going to be a problem for that culture? And so it would not surprise me at all if Mike Green ends up going later in the draft than his current projections are as teams find out more about this stuff. I have heard combine buzz around here that James Pierce from Tennessee also has, not this certainly, but also has red flag concerns for other reasons. And I've been trying to pin that down a little bit. And some of it's just sort of like a personality thing. It's kind of what I'm hearing, is that maybe he just doesn't always get along super well with people. And that can be something that makes him go later in the draft than we think as well. Like, these guys could be top 15 picks or could end up being, later first round guys, depending on what comfort level teams get with what these players are able to do off the field, because they were both two of the most productive pass rushers in college football last season, that you would love to see that production translate to your team. And the Bears would love to have that production if the player and the person matches what the Bears want there as well. Because on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M, who has super low production, like 4.5 sacks across his college career is not NFL level production. You might not normally think, but boy, he sure looks like a darn good football player and has all the different tools. And he was able to address some of the reasoning behind his lack of production, but also noting, like, yeah, that he does know that that's a problem and needs to get better, but is confident in its ability to get better. And his combine performance is really going to go a long way for him. So we'll hear from Shemar Stewart and talk about where he fits in this defensive end class next on Locked On Bears. So from the most productive defensive end to the least productive defensive end, well, not least, but among this group, certainly, Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M. He's someone we talked about a little bit coming out of the Senior Bowl, during our Senior Bowl week podcasts, who I think he's the type of player Dennis Allen could absolutely fall in love with. And yet the pass rush production questions are very real, and I think sometimes we can be quick to write those off or move past them based on our scouting individual biases, right? We watch a guy on tape and go, oh man, like this guy's got all the traits: height, weight, speed, length, pass rush moves, speed, power. Like he can do it all, and he's built in that, sort of Cam Jordan style of bigger defensive ends that Dennis Allen has tended to prefer for his New Orleans Saints teams. But at some point, multiple years of bad production becomes a real red flag. And yes, he had a decent amount of pressures, but even his pass rush win rate, like that is just how often are you beating the offensive lineman across from him, is not nearly as impressive as I want it to be for someone who has such a low sack total, right? So we talk a lot about time, like pressures and hits are important too, and sacks are not always a great measurement of a pass rusher, because if the quarterback throws the ball before he gets there, you can't get the sack even if you had a great pass rush, right? It's the difference between the sack and a pressure is largely in the quarterback's control. It's also your ability to finish at the QB and tackle, and that also seemed to be a problem for Shemar Stewart. But if he had a super great pass rush win rate and just low sacks, well, then you could feel like, well, he's dominating at the line of scrimmage and just isn't able to always finish the quarterback for whatever reason. But the pass rush win rate it's not bad, but it's not as elite as James Pierce, as Abdul Carter, as Mike Green. And so that combination makes it a little bit tough. And yet he's got all the tools. And defensive line coaches are going to look at that ball of clay and say, I can make him into a 10-sack guy. He's got everything I can't teach, and I can teach him everything else he needs. So here's Shemar Stewart talking about this, this concern in his game and the lack of production, and also at the end, the former Chicago Bears player that Shemar Stewart compares himself to, or not compares himself to, but models his game after and really enjoys watching.
Everyone talks about how athletic you are, and then they say, well, where's the production? What's your answer to why you didn't have more production?
Say I wasn't a sack chasing warrior. I just wanted to become the best player for my team. And sometimes the stats don't show that.
Is that something you think you can work on? Like you led the team in pressures, depending on who's charting. Like you still affected the quarterback a lot. Is there like a next step in your game that you feel like can get you to be a high sack player?
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely trying to get more composed when I get around the quarterback. Trying to run through the tackle instead of maybe trying to reach out, lunging for a tackle.
Is that part of like what you were coached to do as far as like your role in the pass rush plan as someone to disrupt as opposed to finishing at the quarterback, or is that more individual?
I'll say it's more individual. I say sometimes I have to play dead to rights, and sometimes I just couldn't finish or couldn't just get there in time. But also, teams was not going to sit there and pat the ball against us. We had a stacked D-line. Everybody knew better than to just sit there and pat the ball against us.
Shemar, is there anybody you mind your game after?
Julius Peppers.
Why?
I feel like my body and our athletic ability are pretty similar. I'm not gonna say I'm up there with him because he's definitely a Hall of Famer, but it's pretty similar in my eyes. Man, I was scrolling through YouTube one day watching some of the NFL guys, and I seen him, and I'm like, man, he kind of looks like me. Same weight and everything. Man, he was explosive, strong, powerful, and he just made plays. I think he got the most interceptions I've ever seen from a D lineman.
So Stewart's going to be one of these kind of prospects that I think NFL teams end up polarized on, and I think we're already seeing, NFL draft media people polarized on, because he can be a little bit of a Rorschach test of pass rushers here. You can kind of see what you want to see on his tape. You can either see a guy who's struggling to get off blocks and finish at the quarterback, or you could see a guy with all of the tools in the world that you can make into a great pass rusher. And you can kind of find pretty clear examples of either to make your point there. And that's why you currently see him projected more in the late first round range, anywhere from 30 to 25 to maybe like 20. But I suspect that he's going to have a really strong showing in his underwear at the combine and the on-field drills. And that's where the lighter fluid really gets poured onto the fire, and that the idea of that draft stock rising up towards the Bears range. Like I was talking to Peter Brukowski from Locked On Packers, and he feels like, man, Shemar Stewart's not going to be, there's no chance he's there when the Green Bay Packers pick in the 20s there, because he thinks could end up even going top 10, maybe even possibly before where the Bears go, right? Like he's going to rise into this range, especially if at the same time someone like Mike Green falls, and or someone like James Pierce falls for, whatever off-field things teams may or may not discover there. And if you have a couple players dropping and him rising at the same time, like if he ends up being the second or third edge rusher on teams' boards, like that's how you become a top 15, top 10 pick. If that combine measurements and speed testing really kind of match what we saw on tape and what you see from a traits standpoint, like NFL coaches love to, it's sort of an ego thing, right? It's sort of like, well, I can be the one that can make him great. Maybe he wasn't getting great coaching at Texas A&M or whatever, but I am a smart enough coach who's great enough at my job that I can make him into something better than we've seen. And we've seen other lower production defensive ends get drafted early. I think of like Rashawn Gary at Michigan, like these raw prospects that, maybe weren't as low as Shemar Stewart, but like that's not always a, deal breaker red flag for teams the way that, off field stuff can be. Like production can be explained in a lot of different ways. That was one of the questions I tried to ask Shemar Stewart. I was like, is this like a Gervon Dexter thing where they're not asking you to really get after the quarterback in the same way? And, credit to him, he said, no, like not really. Like, I just got to be able to finish better or whatever it is. Like, he knows how this works, and he knows that this is something he's going to have to address, but he also knows that his physical tools are going to make teams fall in love, and we'll see if Dennis Allen and the Chicago Bears end up being one of those teams that falls in love. And of course, they could fall in love with him and still end up drafting somebody else at that spot. I mean, we'll just kind of see how this process plays out. But there's edge rushers to like. There's different sizes, different speeds, different levels of production, different styles of everything in this group, and the Bears can certainly find a very good one with the 10th overall pick, and then still find really good offensive linemen in the second and third round, and you can have your cake and eat it too. Whereas I think, to bring it back full circle, if you go offensive line in the first round, then you're trying to find an edge rusher in the second or third, like those players aren't going to be nearly as productive as a pass rusher as a first round edge rusher will be. But first round offensive lineman and a third round offensive lineman, as long as they're like good starting caliber player, like the needle isn't going to be moved a ton different there. Like the difference between the 5th best left guard and the 15th best left guard in the NFL isn't that big of a deal, but the 5th best pass rusher to the 15th best pass rusher is a bit more of a wide range there, and that's where I'm landing so far on this Bears draft class. Free agency obviously has a lot of potential to change that, and if the Bears make any and all big moves, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're coming back tomorrow for another update live from the Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. And of course, for another opportunity to bear down.